this presentation, I want to discuss how to sell your AI/ML project to management, how to sell those recommendations that you've come up with. Too often what I observe is that data scientists do just a brilliant job in working on the project, and then they crash and burn on the goal line because they're not selling their recommendations in a way that management can understand them. And my goal today is to help you understand how to present the great work that you've done in your AI/ML project in a way that will resonate with management and in a way that will get your recommendations accepted and funded and acted upon. So what happens is sometimes data scientists spend too much time talking about their technical prowess, and management doesn't understand. They don't have the background to appreciate that, and rather than build confidence, you're actually scaring them. Okay, and then what happens is they lose confidence in your work, even though you've done a good job. It's just lost. So who'll be in the conference room when you're presenting the results of your work? Who do you need to build confidence? The audience always consists of senior executives, and they'll definitely be more senior than you in terms of rank and experience and credibility within the organization. So keep that in mind. And keep in mind, too, that executives, their knowledge of AI/ML, that's totally outside their domain. That's going to be a problem. So, who's in the conference room? They're going to be these characters here. Someone who's openly uncomfortable with the topic and what you're talking about. Okay? And there's going to be somebody who is quiet and introspective, a little hard to read, and there'll be someone who's openly skeptical and openly problematic in terms of your ability to sell them. So given this kind of a challenging audience, what should you do? My suggestions are you focus on the business value that you're deriving from your technical work. You describe your project approach very briefly, but only at a very conceptual level. And you've got to ignore the technical details, even though you're very proud of them and probably have every right to be proud of those technical details. So keep those people in mind. So look at this one. Our Innovate, Justify It feature uses AI/ML model to find results that agree with your point of view. Okay, so somebody thinks it's smart to speak to the audience's bias. That's a bad strategy. So presenting your results in a positive light, that's always an excellent strategy. But twisting the results to align with a previously determined direction or what you think the boss wants to hear, that's just not a good strategy, and it may well be unethical. So again, you don't want to go there. So what are we going to talk about today? So the first thing we're going to talk about is, what is your goal in the presentation? Okay? You want to talk about what you did very briefly, spend most of your time to sell your recommendations and showing how they benefit the business. That's what you want to work on. Now, you may say so, but nonetheless, management is going to ask you some questions. And what happens is, those questions are going to fall into these 10 topic areas. And we're going to spend a few minutes and talk about each one of these 10 topic areas that are likely going to be raised by the management audience that you're trying to impress. Okay? And then we're going to, then you'll get to the question and answer part of the presentation. So then the question becomes, how are you going to answer the questions? The way you answer them will either add the confidence in management that your recommendations make sense, or they'll undermine the confidence and make people nervous, and they don't want to hear from you. No, thank you. How quickly can I get out of here? And maybe people start looking at their watches. Okay, then you know got a problem on your hands. So, what is your goal? This is not your goal, okay? You never want to crash and burn in front of your senior executives. All right, so how do you avoid that? Or how do you go there? How do you crash and burn? Spend time explaining the cool technology that you use to build your model and analyze your data, even though you know that's a great story. Another way to crash and burn is to beat your chest and show off the advanced algorithm you used, even though you're proud of that work. The third way is to remind everyone that your team worked incredibly hard and and don't spend time on that even though it is true. Okay, so rather, what do? Focus on these aspects: your business improvement recommendation, and then money, money, money. You're there to ask for money. You want to do a follow-on project, you want to expand what you're doing. Those are the kinds of things you want to. So to avoid crash and burn, focus on the business opportunity that you're going to achieve for the organization. So now we're going to tackle those 10 topics I showed you on the previous slide and see how you deal with each one of them, okay? And the first of those 10 was the accuracy of the business opportunity. The confidence that you have in the recommendations is highly dependent on ensuring that the project team is attacking an accurate business problem or opportunity statement. Too many projects are chartered based on some symptom statement that's not a problem statement, so don't go there. So the kinds of issues that you're going to face is from this list of questions. Okay, how did you determine the business opportunity was reasonably accurate, for example? So all these questions that I'm going to share with you today, they will all help you scope the project and make sure that you're doing the right work so that at the end your recommendations are defensible and no one can get you off their puck by some curveball question. Okay, so that's what's important. How did you determine that the technology that you're using is credible, for example? Okay, and then the next one, you probably have heard that a lot of AI ML succeeds or fails based on data, volume and quality and that kind of thing. And that's absolutely true. So what I mean by data sufficiency is volume and variety. And volume is often related to the number of time periods of history, and it's the most critical element in your project. So the kinds of questions that are going to come up are ones like this. How did you determine that whatever data sources you pick are in fact relevant to the business problem space? And a bunch of related questions to that. So some people have sufficient data, but they have issues in the data quality. Okay. Now, what do I mean by quality? That term is thrown around a lot. So I mean, first, accuracy, no or few invalid or missing values, and secondly, completeness, no nulls, no missing rows, that kind of thing. So that leads to questions like these. How do you know if the quality of the data that you employed is sufficient to support the model comprehensively? That's a question that someone who doesn't really have a lot of understanding of the technology can comfortably ask, and you as a project team had better be able to answer that. Otherwise, why would I listen to your recommendations? So this one's about the machine learning algorithm adequacy. So I think we're aware that the machine learning algorithm is a procedure that reads the training data to create the machine learning model. The algorithms are available to build AI/ML models vary widely in scope, complexity, and indeed quality. So the confidence you can have in your recommendation is dependent on the adequacy of these algorithms. So it leads to questions like these. How did you determine which algorithm to use to build your model? So, well, we randomly put one into our Amazon shopping cart. That is not a good answer. So, can you line up the problem space with the algorithm that you picked up? How many did you use? Did you revise them? Did they work for you? What did you discard? And then the machine learning model adequacy. So whatever model you created, how did you determine that it's worthwhile? So the model consists of a number of components: the rules, the numbers, and the algorithm-specific data structure required to make predictions when the model uses real-world data in a production setting. So I think you know that models, again, vary widely in terms of scope and complexity and quality. And if you don't get that right, why would I believe your recommendations? So, how do we know that the model isn't subtly or worse, significantly different, modeling a different business situation inadvertently from what it is that you said you were targeting or planning? And then there's some related questions. Okay, and then the congruity between the data and the model. They have to fit together, right? If the data is maybe tilted this way and the model is tilted that way, why would I believe the results? Like, how do I determine that? So that leads to these kind of questions. How do we know that the data is sufficiently comprehensive for the algorithms you're using to create the model? I think we're all aware of some hilarious and sometimes downright scary and dangerous results when these things don't work together properly, right? Then next thing we know, somebody's being fired, or there's a lawsuit, or a regulator is on our case. All bad things that are a big distraction from whatever we're trying to achieve. What about model governance? How did you get the assurance that your data quality is adequate? Oops. Okay, now advancing the corporate strategy, you can see this has got nothing to do with AI ML. However, if this objective or scope of your project doesn't advance the corporate strategy in some way, shape, or form, why are we spending money or allocating people to this particular AI ML project? So some questions that come up here is, please describe how you ensured that the model's goal is aligned with our business goal or pressing issues that we're facing. As you walk down this road around aligning or advancing with the corporate strategy, you soon find out that some of the corporate strategy is a bit mushy. So your team may be starting to think, we need to change the corporate strategy. You got to be super careful to bring that up. A lot of people don't want to hear that, even if you have a point. So you need to be very careful about that. Okay, now understanding the data elements. The reality is that of all the data you're using, some data elements, i.e. columns, right, are always more important in terms of their impact on the AI model results than other data elements. So again, if you don't understand that, you're going to run into a problem. Okay, and the issue here comes, you end up with columns in different data sources that have very similar namings, and sometimes those names are kind of cryptic and lead you to believe they're the same thing, and they can be joined, and when they're not. So that's a risk factor that a lot of projects run into, is this naming problem. Oh, sorry, I should have. Okay, the adequacy of the team complete competencies. The issue is that no team has all this expertise or all the capacity that they would like to have for their project. And AI/ML project teams are no different. So need to be candid in your self-assessment of what your team can do and what it can't do very well. Excuse me. So what's not part of your team that you need to be successful, and what's your strategy for acquiring that? Often headhunting isn't possible. I don't know if you've seen these ads. Need AI ML specialist, 10 years of experience. Excuse me, and maybe I'm getting into Sandra's topic, but those people just don't exist, right? And some organizations would love to have those. I would love to have those, but they're just not available. So you go with a consultant, you just say, wait a minute, we got to train up some people. We got to mentor some of our staff to solve some of these problems. And then what about responsible AI? Are you dealing with that in some way, shape, or form? Responsible AI is about ethics. Well, ethics can be a very awkward, abstract, ethereal topic that people struggle to deal with, okay? And in their enthusiasm, many project teams just ignore it, which is a good way to fail. So what do you do to improve on that? Well, you ask yourself some questions like this. Have you conducted a fairness and bias assessment of the model results? And if your data involves sensitive topics like people's personal information or financial results, privacy issues, then you have to take extra action in the way you manage your data. And the last one of these is the explainability of results. So explainability is a set of processes and methods that allow human end users to comprehend and trust that the results they're seeing are accurate, worthwhile, are repeatable, those kinds of things. So what do we do that? What steps did you take to enhance trust and confidence? How would you characterize your model's accuracy, explainability, and transparency? Have you performed a risk assessment? Right? These are the kinds of topics that you need to think about. So, if you think about these 10 topics and can answer the questions that are underneath the topics, you're going to have a very comprehensive project plan that will deliver results you can be proud of, that you can defend, and if management asks you questions, you will have the answer because you've anticipated the kinds of questions they're most likely to ask you as managers, as non-techies, as people who are concerned about the future of the organization and its reputation. Okay, so if you get hit with one of these questions that I've breezed by here today, how should you answer them? Okay, so the first one is blank stares. Okay, this is not a good way to respond to a question from a senior executive. So what it means is you haven't addressed the topic that the person is asking. And it requires more attention, and blank stares from you will erode confidence. Okay? The other thing that you can do is you can provide some lengthy answers filled with a lot of data science jargon. Not a good plan. Okay? Again, that means you haven't really addressed the issue. And your team may lack the critical skills. And again, management's confidence in the recommendation should decrease or even disappear. And if you say, our approach is the same as fill in the blank, which of these organizations that everybody understands, that won't help you either, because the reality is that your problem space is different from theirs, even though in some ways you may think they're leading the path. They're not in your context. Okay, so those are the answers not to give. Let's talk about what do you do. Okay, the first thing you do is you give a thoughtful response based on planning for the questions that I've shared with you. Okay? And don't be afraid to say what some of the risks or uncertainties are, because that will be impressive that you've thought about those things and you've understood them. That will increase confidence. Another thing you could talk about is speculate a little bit about unanticipated consequences. You know, maybe the business benefits won't be quite as much as we'd like. Maybe we will need more data to advance the project. Be upfront about that. Talk about business implications. There's going to be change in the organization through the implementation, or the introduction rather, of this AI/ML application. So make sure you cover that. The other thing that you can do is have some slides in your back pocket. They're not part of what you've published as the presentation, but if a question comes up and you have a slide that answers that question, you're golden. That really impresses people. They know that you understand the problem space and the situation and the project. And while on one hand you're proud of the work that's being done, it's okay to mention that there are limitations. It does this, it doesn't do that. That's a different problem. Okay, if it's about helping customers have a better experience, that's totally different from reworking the call center with AI. So remind people what the scope was or is and what it isn't. Because if you get people excited, they think, well, maybe you should have solved that problem and that problem. Okay, fine, we can solve those with the next project, but we didn't set out to solve those problems, and we should remind ourselves of that. So, sometimes a different approach is taken to responding to the, So the first 3 points, if you do that, they're going to erode confidence, and you're going to go nowhere. The last 4, if you take that approach to these questions, they're going to build confidence, and people will say, wow, what a great team, what a great leader. Give that person a promotion, give them a bonus. You know, he needs a bigger office, or she needs a bigger office, whatever. And that's what you want to do in the sales pitch. What you don't want to do is this. We're outsourcing all our critical business decisions to a flawed AI/ML model with dubious data. What could possibly go wrong? You know, don't oversell your results, and don't wildly overestimate expected benefits. So I hope I've given you a whole series of ideas on where not to go in these questions and in the way to deal with it. So, in conclusion, here's the reality. Your project must address many topics to deliver a high confidence set of recommendations. Okay, so the more of those questions that you address through your scope, through your approach, through your testing, through your verification, whatever deliverable you're working on, the more confidence everyone can have in your recommendations and in the results of the project. So these are the 10 topic areas that we discussed: the business opportunity, the data, the algorithm, the model, the congruity, the advance of the corporate strategy is important because we shouldn't be spending money on things that don't advance the strategy. Sometimes when you get new technology like AI, people manage to get R&D projects or exploratory projects funded. Good for them. But those shouldn't be too big or take too long. And then real projects that have real business value should be undertaken. You need to understand the data, and if your team doesn't have all the expertise that you need to address that. And you need to be responsible about AI. So, responding accurately and confidently to the questions for the topics I presented will cause your boss to accept your recommendations. And the bottom line is, that's how we achieve success as an AI/ML project team. So what should we do about this? What are the recommendations that we should think about? When you're talking to management, focus on business value from your work. Ignore the technical details, even you've been immersed in that for months. And because you've been immersed in that for months, you tend to think about that. But you're in a new environment in front of management. And if you can adjust to that, you'll be more successful. Answer the relevant questions during the course of your project to ensure that at the end of the project, you'll be able to answer all these questions if they come up. Now, don't discuss these questions, even though you've addressed them, if management doesn't bring them up. You just create a problem for yourself if you end up putting the question up on a slide yourself and then answer it. Management will say, gee, I didn't think of that. Maybe I should ask some other questions. And then all of a sudden you've lost control of the presentation. So address all the questions in terms of your scope and work on the project and be ready to answer the questions if management brings them up. But don't bring up the questions if nobody brings it up.